Good morning, everyone. We're just about ready to begin. Everybody should be able to see us on Facebook Live. A few quick announcements. Audience microphones and video cameras are muted. That's to help us improve bandwidth. So don't be surprised if you can't see yourself. Also, please ask questions. If you're in Zoom, go to the Q&A button and tap it. And you'll be able to ask a question, type in a question there. And in Facebook, if you will just make your comments as you would usually do, I will monitor those for questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Alexander. Remember that we'll post video recordings both on Facebook afterwards and YouTube, and you can get to both of those items if you forget how by going to the page where you registered for this event today. We'd like to put in one last plug for vote411.org. Don't forget, you can find information about your voter registration status, information on the ballot, especially information on candidates. Okay, Jane, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Mary Louise. She's a jewel. I don't know what we would do without her to monitor our technology part. Welcome to our rescheduled first meeting of the year for the League of Women Voters. My name is Jane Spruill, and I'm the president for the Pensacola Bay Area League. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization, which means we neither support nor oppose any particular candidate or political party. In an election year like 2020, this year, the League encourages informed and active participation in government through voting. We work diligently to register eligible voters and to recruit volunteers to work at the precincts. The League organizes and moderates rallies and forums where voters get to meet and learn about the candidates. We speak to community groups about the ballot concerning the amendments, and we publish a written guide for voters that we distribute throughout both counties. I'm very proud of the programs that we have planned for this year and the upcoming events, particularly those political rallies and forums. You can find out more about these events on our Facebook page for the League of Women Voters, Pensacola Bay Area. Our next Saturday morning meeting will be focused on the 6 amendments that you'll find on the ballot this year. It is called The Vote. This meeting will take place on Saturday, October 17th, again in a Zoom format. We'll start at 10:15 with a virtual coffee time, and at 10:30, those speakers will begin. This year, we're integrating a National League policy focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Developing partnerships with other organizations in our local community has been a primary goal. Our League members are very interested in how and which local groups are partnering. The phrases, "don't reinvent the wheel," and "many hands make for light work" sound so simple. And we're extending an open invitation to community groups who might be interested. Today, we're recognizing the Movement for Change organization as a partner in this event, and we welcome you to our program. I'm especially excited to welcome our regular membership. This is our first meeting. So welcome to you and your guest. These Saturday membership meetings are public events, and we welcome and encourage the community anytime to attend. When I joined the League, it was these meetings and speakers on Saturday mornings that I really was impressed with. I hope we have continued to inspire women and men to become members of the League of Women Voters. We have new members that went through training last month, and what a great group of folks. These individuals are bringing important skills and passion to the League. It's an impressive group. Months ago, pre-pandemic, we started to sit down as a board and think about the topics for our membership meetings for this year, who we wanted to invite, and what kinds of things we wanted to address. And I can tell you it took about 3 seconds for Dr. Cedric Alexander's name to rise to the top as a person that we would love to hear from and to speak at one of our meetings. And let me tell you why. Dr. Cedric Alexander is a nationally recognized expert in modern law enforcement and is a licensed clinical psychologist. His career in law enforcement has included positions at the local level, state level, and federal level. He was selected as a member of President Barack Obama's task force for the 21st century policing. He served as chief of police in DeKalb County, Georgia. One of the positions he has held is Deputy Commissioner for New York Criminal Justice Services and President of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. He helped to implement security and regulatory actions with the TSA and crafted policy for New York State law enforcement officials. Dr. Alexander has authored books and provided commentary to CNN and PBS. But we take especially great pride in the fact that this accomplished guy was born and raised in Pensacola, recently retired, decided to move home, and we welcome him back to Pensacola. He currently spearheads the Pensacola Police Advisory Committee. Specifically, he serves as a liaison between police officers. Dr. Alexander will speak today about acknowledging the need for change in the 21st century. Welcome to the League, Dr. Alexander.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Jane and Mary Louise. And I want to give whole thanks to the League of Women Voters for thinking of me to have an opportunity to be here with you this morning. I tell you, I'm really very delighted to be back home. I've been gone all week, Jane, to Minneapolis, doing some very critical work there that still is of urgent need surrounding the death of George Floyd. But to have an opportunity to be here with you all this morning, to me, is really delightful in the sense that being back home for almost 2 years now, where I came back to retire, really has not turned into that. I'd hoped in some ways to retire, just go to fish and go to the beach every day. But there was clearly some other things that were still left undone that I needed to involve myself in. And unfortunately, they have been sad, to say the least. But nevertheless, I'm thankful that I'm able to take whatever experience, whatever training, whatever education I've acquired over the years to try to help our community here in Pensacola and to try to help the nation at large. So thank you again for allowing me to be here with you. A couple of things I wanted to touch on for a few minutes and then give your audience an opportunity to ask any questions that they felt they wanted to ask that might be more relevant to how they're thinking and feeling about things. But as we all well know, we're living in a very challenging time of COVID, of a large number of American cities across this country and even this community that are unemployed and struggling. We're living in a time of great discontent. We're living in a time where both sides of the aisle are finding it very difficult to find a medium point. But we as a community, any community, and we'll take our own community here in Pensacola, I truly believe here we have good leadership. We have people who will listen. I've gotten to know some of that leadership over the last couple of years. And trust me, I would not be involved with them if I did not feel that their intentions and their hearts were in the right places. But Pensacola, just like any other city in America, has its challenges. And as we begin to think about police reform, as we begin to think about many of the social ills that take place in this community and across the globe and around the country, it would be remiss of me not to be able to talk about some of these things. So let's start with police reform. And police reform, quite frankly, did not begin with the unfortunate incident on May 25th of this year involving George Floyd. The painful and horrible event that we saw took place as a man lost his life under the knee of a police officer on that date. But it even goes back before that. It goes back before Michael Brown. It goes back before Sandra Bland. It goes back before all those names that we all have become too familiar with. But I can tell you, as someone who's been involved in law enforcement over 40 years of my career, who has worked as a clinical psychologist and as a state and a federal administrator, one thing that I know, that we have the ability in this country to create reform that's going to be to the better benefit of the citizens that we serve, and it's going to be to the better benefit of police officers and police departments across this community and across this country, who will benefit from these reforms. We've heard so much about defunding and dismantling and ridding police departments. Well, let me be clear about this, and I said this in Minneapolis the other day on the campus of the University of Minnesota. Police departments are not going anywhere. We must have public safety. Public safety is crucial to the everyday needs of having a civilized society in which we can live and work in and feel safe. And we must have public safety and police departments across our country and in our communities, because there are bad actors that are out there. Bad actors that have to be confronted and have to be brought into custody and have to be tried before a court of law. And the only way that we do that is that we must have a robust police department and a criminal justice system. But what we also must have, we must have an ability to look inside our police agencies and begin to say to ourselves, what is it that we can do better? Because the number of events that we've seen that raise so much controversy and concern among all people, not just people of color, but people across this country, who are bothered by the images oftentimes that are seen of young Black men and women who die at the hands of police. That's reality, that's real, and we can attempt to justify some of these behaviors. But at the end of the day, I think we all will conclude, and certainly this country has concluded, that there must be reforms that take place. So many of these reforms that we're in the process of looking at, and I'm going to name four of them that are clearly very important to me. And this is based on the work that I've written. This is based on other research that I've read. This is based on my own experience, having been police chief of two major cities in this country, is that we must begin from the very moment that we hire individuals into policing in this country. We must not just in their background take a look at their driving record, credit history, take 3 or 4 references and go by and see people and they all give us a thumbs up. I truly think we have to dig a lot deeper. We have to know truly who those individuals are. Where were they raised? And we all can't help the families and communities we raised in. But what we are looking for are people who have compassion for other people, who have a respect for human life, who have the ability to know that if they want to serve as a public safety officer in this community, in this country, their primary role is to serve as a guardian to the community and not a warrior to that community. That is hugely important. So that means we must take a deeper dive, not just into their psychological history, but also into who they are personally. What do we know about them? What do we know about the friends and relationships that they have garnered with people over time? Have they kept themselves isolated or segregated to only the communities in which they have grown up in? Or have they, through the need or through the access, I should say, of social media, expanded themselves out to meet people in different parts of the country and around the globe, who has a sensitivity to differences, not just of people, but also places and things? These are the type of personalities I truly believe that we have to begin to go after and access. And that's just the beginning. And once these young women, men and women have been identified and they go through the process, and the next stage, they go into training. How are we training them? What are we teaching them in these police academies? We know that we have state certified classes that they must take, but be quite honest, it's going to take citizens like yourself to ask your local training agencies that train police officers and public safety officials, I want to come inside and look and hear and see what it is that you're training our young men and women. And by the way, you have the right to do that. But I think it's important that we look at our training protocols. We have the ability to see how they're trained, what they're being taught, because policing is just more than running people down. It's not just running and gunning and jumping off buildings and over fences, all of that stuff that we see on television. That is truly a real, very small percentage of the job. The greatest majority of your job as a police officer is going to be engaging and interacting with people, a vast number of people from very different walks of life and who have had different experiences, and not just in the obvious of white and black, but in what's not so obvious, generational differences, cultural differences, or a different way of thinking about the world. And as a police officer today, you must have the ability to be open and non-judgmental, to be able to exercise procedural justice, which is merely being able to listen to people, giving them an opportunity to share their experience, and the ability for them to feel that they're being heard and that they can trust you. So we must look at our training protocols and look and see if we're training our young men and women the things that they need to know to go out into a very modern 21st century that is so complex, so convoluted, and the challenges that are out there can very easily be overwhelming. The other piece, what we must do once they graduate from those academies and come into police departments across this country, we must have the ability to have men and women who they're going to be paired with during the continuing training that they will receive beyond their formal academy training. But they got to be with men and women who can also role model the type of professional attitude that need to be demonstrated out here on these American streets. They must have training advisors and role models who themselves have the ability to see inwardly, who have the ability to feel sensitivity and have a need to be guardians to communities. It's no longer this, well, what they taught in you in the academy doesn't matter. It's what you learn out here on the street. Now, that's not it. It is what we're teaching in those academies and the realities of the street, which is a lot to be learned. But we have to learn how to do it in a way that is constitutionally right for every person that we come in contact with. In any job, there are going to be shortcuts. In any jobs, there are going to be new ways to do things better. We'll learn those along the way, and those things will be taught. But at the end of all that, are they doing things in a professional, constitutional type of way? That is what really matters in this world we live in, and the expectation that people have of policing across this country. But I think it's also important to mention too, as we go on, once they have received their formal training, once they have been released out on their own as police officers to take calls for service, we got to make sure that they have good supervision. We got to make sure that they have men and women that they report to every day who's responsible for supervising them and grading them on their performance and their actions. We have to make sure that we're able to do that in a manner that is going to be acceptable and one that is going to be professional. So we have to have good supervision. Supervision, that means there's a great deal of accountability in the work that we do. Everybody knows that policing is a tough job. Everybody knows that the men and women go out there every day, put their lives on the line to protect us all and keep us safe. But there still is an expectation of accountability, and that is hugely important. And last but not least, you must have good leadership at the top of your organization. You must have chiefs of police and sheriffs and marshals who understand what modern day policing means and what it looked like. They must be the ones who role model from the top of that organization down to the last man or woman hired. Here are my vision, here are the expectations, and here are the things that must be done so that we will always, as best we can, be characterized as a department that is one of quality men and women and those who are very knowledgeable of their own insights around their own biases, rather, and particularly their implicit biases, which are oftentimes unconscious. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But that is hugely important. So if we think about all the social challenges that are taking place today in this country, it is important for all of us, particularly for our public service officials, public safety officials. We need to feel good about them. We need to truly feel safe with them. And every part of our communities have to feel that way. And whether you live in the suburbs or you live in the city, whether you live in the rural area of this city or this county or anywhere in this country, If any parts of any of our communities don't feel that they're valued, then we all have a problem. It is just not a problem to that one community. It should be an issue for all of us. And then it becomes all of our responsibilities to, in some kind of way, ensure that the same level of treatment and safety and security that you feel in whatever neighborhood you live in, that you should feel, that everyone should feel that way throughout our communities. That is wholly important. But it's also important, too, that we're aware of what our implicit and explicit biases are. And let me talk about that for a moment. We hear a lot about that term today, implicit bias, explicit bias, or just bias in general. And what is that? What is implicit bias? Implicit bias, quite frankly, is something that we're all born with. It's in our brain, and it's located in the very lower part of our brain, in the most primitive part of our brain, that is called the amygdala. There in the amygdala lies fight and flight, things that we are not familiar with, whether it's people, places, or things. We have a tendency to guard ourselves or make pre-assumptions of a danger that really may not be there, or make assumptions about things that we're just not familiar with. Think about where you are sitting at this very moment, or standing. If something enters into your environment that you have never seen before and it looked foreign, it's going to it's going to get your attention, and it probably even is going to increase your heart rate, your blood pressure, and all those other physiological things that occur when we feel slightly anxious or horribly afraid. That is normal. It's not unusual. But we also can translate that when it comes to people that we're not familiar with, or maybe stereotypes that we've learned over the years about people, places, and things that may not be true. And we hold those things. But those implicit biases are the thing that get in our way. For an example, and I'll give you a good one. Many years ago, I'm a baby boomer. And baby boomers, we grew up in a time and era where it was always typically important for men to take care of women. We know that to be true. The younger generation may have a different experience, but as baby boomers, that's how men were raised. So here you are. You're a female police officer sitting there in roll call with other men, and you may have a supervisor who may himself be a baby boomer. And his attitude is, I have these men and women that work for me, but when women go out on certain calls for service, I need to make sure that a man go with them as a backup. Now, if you were to ask those women who have had those experiences over the years, they will tell you very frankly, it's troubling and it's bothersome. They have been trained as well. You want to send me a backup? Why not send me another woman as a backup? Why does it have to be a man and me feel like the only reason you're sending a man is because I'm not capable or strong enough to be able to do the job? And in all that sergeant supervisor's best intentions was not to be offensive. For the person or that woman, it felt offensive. But it's unconscious. It's part of our generational upbringing. It's part of what we learn about people, or what we've been told to believe about other people around gender, around race, around religion, around sexual orientation, and so forth and so on. But we have these implicit biases when it comes very basic and fundamental to things we're not familiar with. But as we grow older and as we interact with a larger world around us, what are the things that we're learning that's impacting how we think and feel? We all have been exposed to biases of others, and we all have incorporated some of those biases in our own psyche. But we live in a time now where we all have to step back and we have to ask ourselves, things that I am not most familiar with sometimes are things I need to give myself opportunity to become more familiar with. I'm not familiar with a lot of things that are very relevant today. I grew up in a very different time. I grew up in a very segregated Pensacola at one time in its history. But I also know too that over the course of my life, as I became a young adult, as I integrated into the world, a lot of my attitudes about people, places, and things had to change in order for me to be successful in any environment. And I could not hold on to those old stereotypes by merely looking at someone and thinking that they're one thing when I have not given them the opportunity to be something else. So many of us hold these implicit biases. We may not be intentional with them, but we do have them. And the important piece is to become conscious of those things. And as we become conscious of them, it's also important that we develop a number of countermeasures that will allow us to step back and to think and to move through a society that is becoming even more diverse as we move into this 21st century. And then there's the explicit bias, just the straight in your face, not even a microaggression, but one that is vividly, clearly in your face. You're not capable of doing this job because you are a woman, you're a person of color, or even you're a man, or whatever the case may happen to be. You're not tall enough, you're not short enough. So we have those folks out there who clearly have some really disdain for people who may be from other cultures, races, backgrounds, religious preferences, sexual preferences. You will not survive in a society today with those type of explicit biases. We may think that we can, but trust me, you're going to be limited to a very closed place that is not going to be accepting of a much broader community and an ever-changing community and a much changing nation and world. But we need to be aware of these biases in our country and in ourselves, I should say. And none of us can help what communities of what families we were born into and the messages that we receive. But when we become young adults and as we move through adulthood, regardless of where we are, we all have a responsibility to expand ourselves and look inward, learn ourselves, and make sure that our implicit biases are not getting in the way as best we can, and have the ability to learn from the mistakes that we make and the courage to ask those that we may unintentionally offended in some type of way if we did so. Because sometimes we may have an inkling of an idea and sometimes we may not. But to have the courage, the ability today to look inwardly at ourselves, and I certainly had to do my own self-assessment as a man of color who learned a lot of different things in my era growing up that weren't necessarily true about people, places, and things. And we all have that responsibility to ourselves, to this community in which we live in, and to this country. And I'm going to stop here and I'm going to open it up for any questions that are comments that any of you may have.
Go on.
Well, I have one. And since I'm here, I get to go first. Then I'll hand it to you, Mary Louise. I know you have a list of things.
No problem.
I just wanted to ask about the role of the media in all of this. Do you see them with some implicit bias at times? How does that factor in?
Well, I mean, certainly and I will say this, having been a chief twice in two cities in this country, over in DeKalb County, Georgia, which was a large suburb there of Atlanta, and also in Rochester, New York. Yeah, I mean, the media themselves are made up of people, of individuals, people that's just like you and I. And even though they may be skilled in their jobs of gathering information, reporting information, and they come up under some journalistic, ethical and moral canon, if you will, inside their profession. But at the same time, you're talking people, you're talking individuals. And sometimes how they report news about people, about a political party that may be on the opposite side, can sometimes be very narrow in scope. But I think that's when it becomes very important for us, Jane, to be able for ourselves, as we read about things that are going on, as we hear about things that are going on, that we ourselves have the ability to make our own assessment and not allow it just to be the assessments of someone else. The media's responsibility is to report the news as accurately as they can based on the information that they give. But sometimes the information that you receive as a journalist, it all depends on how that information is deployed to the public, how it's given out, where it leans to, or what inference may be put on it. But overall, my experience has been with the journal, with folks in media, has really been a positive one, but certainly I've had my challenges. But we do see the day at a national level. A lot of our journalists and those that are experts in their fields tend to sometimes what many would say would be over-exaggerate or underrepresent what may be the truth or not be the truth. But that's why it becomes important for us, is for also us to remember a lot of these shows that we see, some of it oftentimes is about rating and it's entertainment.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to be able to decipher, because there is credible news out there. I don't accept this notion that every news outlet out there gives us bad news. I think there's some wonderful journalism that takes place in this country. And I think there's sometimes it can be slanted depending on who's writing it or what is being written. And that happens everywhere. But we individually still have a responsibility to read. And it's important that we read and important that we gather the facts. But it's even more important that you make decisions for yourself based on a wide variety of information that you may cover or you may read, because that's hugely important in us making responsible decisions.
Okay, there are several questions from the audience. Dr. Alexander, here's the first one. According to the data from the Juvenile Justice Department of Florida, the First Judicial Circuit is third in the state arresting children in school. What sort of training should our local law enforcement officials be required better to equip them to deal with children without arresting them?
Well, that is a real problem, and one that is, in particularly in our urban schools across this country, it just continues to be a pipeline to jail, if you will. And I think one thing, and we said this 5 years ago when I was appointed to President Obama's task force on 21st century, we put together a document in which we were directed to do by the president at that time that would enhance relationships between policing and community in this country. And in that document, that 21st century task force document, which is still relevant today in many departments across this country today, and I have been saying this for a number of years, is that can we rethink having our city and county police officers inside of public schools? Because here's what I think needs to happen, is that you can still have police officer standard training, post-certified police officers in these public schools, but they're trained as police officers, they're certified as police officers, but they are more specifically trained to work inside schools that have a very specific problem. Children in many of our schools, urban schools and suburban schools, come there with a great deal of issues in rural areas or whatever. They have psychological issues. They have early issues around substance abuse. Many of them don't have the emotional maturity to work through many of these issues in their lives. And you got to have men and women who are specifically trained to work with school-aged children to these specific problems, because we're not going to wrest our way out of this merely because a child acts out in school or even become violent, because that's the indicator with young children something much greater is going on that he or she cannot emotionally or psychologically maintain or manage. So I think it's important for me as a chief of police. I would rather take my police officers and put them out here on the street to do the things that we train them to do. And I don't really think we do them the very best service when we take officers that we're trained to do one thing and put them inside of schools. And oftentimes at no fault of their own, they end up getting themselves in trouble or being criticized about because of doing things that they're just not trained to do. We got to move away from that. And that becomes part of the norm in this country. Because even if we think about this, and I can tell you clearly that for the last 30 or 40 years, we place so much on police officers to do. We have asked them to be social workers, psychologists. We've asked them to do everything, much as we've asked many of our teachers in our schools to do today. But what we have to do is bring policing back to what it was designed to do, and that's prevention. And we have to make sure that in our communities, we have people who are trained when these calls for service, mental health calls for service go out. We have people who are ready to respond along with police, but they're trained to manage those individuals because that's what their background entails. That's where their training and certifications are. So when we start thinking about how do we reform police, we reform police not in a way to hurt police, but really in a way to enhance the service and give them the ability to be back out on the streets, patrolling our communities, our neighborhoods, getting out of their cars, meeting people. Because I can tell you countless stories, and so can many police officers across this country, and you've read about them, where police officers end up in classrooms with young people, and in situations turn sometimes horribly bad, and officers end up getting disciplined or fired or someone getting hurt. But we got to stop putting our peace officers in these types of positions and putting them in places that they're not trained to do, but putting resources in there, because you still can put uniform school resource officers who have specific training in working in our public and private schools across this country. That's their training. That's their certification annually. And they can do a far better job than I would ever be able to do as a police officer when I have no training and understanding as to how to work with that school population of young people, and particularly with all the social ills and the social problems and the psychology that is oftentimes very troubled kids bring to these schools every day. Because a lot of these kids are not bad kids. And I don't care whether you're on the west side of Chicago or you're out in Pace, Florida. A lot of these kids just struggle with emotional dysfunction that is no fault of their own. But imagine if you live in some of these communities, and I don't care where you live, imagine when you don't have the parents are present. In absence of parenthood, doesn't matter whether they work 20 hours a day or corporate America, or whether they're just not around because they're abusing drugs or whatever. In the end of the day, all these kids are affected the same way. And it plays itself out often in our public school systems. So I hope I answered your question.
I think that you did. Here's another question that has to do with training. This person would like to know if you think it's a good idea to require a college degree, either AA or BA, or a several-year training academy for police officers.
Well, that is a great question. That's a question that has been debated for so long. But here's the thing you have to consider. At the end of the day, whether they have a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, or whether they have a high school degree and some military training or background, or whatever the case may happen to be. And let me answer it this way first. What you want more than anything else goes back to what I was saying moments ago in my opening statements. You want a person who have compassion and respect for human life, and who want to be a guardian and not a warrior. Because if we're not recruiting the right individuals, whether they have a bachelor's degree or whether they have a high school diploma, we're going to be in trouble. What I would like to think about ideally is being able to see research, which is I'm not aware of to this day, that suggests whether you're more successful with a 4-year degree than with a high school diploma. Now, anecdotally speaking, my experience tells me this. I truly believe the more formal training and education that we have is always going to be valuable. But I also believe, too, more than anything else, is the people that we recruit. Can we set an educational standard, one that is realistic, one that allows us to broadly recruit men and women? But if you start getting into mandatory 4-year degree educations, then you also have to be willing to pay an exceptionally lot more amount of money, because that population as well is going to be very difficult to recruit, because so many other occupations are trying to recruit that same educated population as well. So policing have to be in a position where they can compete with those salaries and those benefits. But I think that question really deserves, in all fairness, more research and need to be thought through further. But here again, anecdotally speaking, I think we have to look for maturity in individuals. We have to look and see where their life has brought them to. I would rather that they be somewhere around 22, 23 years of age, starting in the profession that gives them some life experience, ideally. But here again, I think all this needs to be researched and further looked into as we continue to advance policing in the 21st century.
Okay, next question. What do you think about the idea of hiring social workers in the law enforcement agencies to cover homelessness, mental illness, etc., thus freeing up the officials to deal with more violent and dangerous calls?
And I think I just answered that question, because I think two things will happen. If we begin taking policing away from the things they don't have the expertise in and put them back where we're training them, they're not trained to be social workers and psychologists. They're trained to go out here and build relationships in the community, meet people, and to be able to confront bad actors should they come about. And there are bad actors in the world. We need good, well-trained policemen and women. But at the same time, we also have to be thoughtful in the sense that as we reform policing, we have to think about in our budgets, not defunding, but redirecting funding. And it doesn't have to come from police budgets. It can come from anywhere in government, but redirecting funding to hire, support, and to have people who can respond to homelessness, who can respond with people with mental health illnesses and crisis, to deal with some of these social ills that we have placed on our police officers to do, but we haven't adequately trained them to do. And in some places, they haven't been trained at all. They just go out and do the very best they can, or the training has been very minimal. Because a lot of these events that we have seen over time have involved people who is either struggling with a mental illness or some type of addiction, which comes up under mental illness, by the way. But I think it becomes important that we begin to look at and out of a different set of lenses and move ourselves away from what we used to do in terms into doing something different. Even right down here again to the way we recruit. It is not to advantage to advertise in policing, and I've seen it across the country. And when I was in the cab, I even stopped it. The running and gunning and shooting and jumping over tall buildings with a single bound, that's not what police officers do every day. Occasionally those things do occur, but the greatest 80-90% of the work that they do every day is engaging the public, building relationships, and being part of the community in which they serve. And if we advertise that way, those are going to be the personalities that we attract. But if we advertise in other direction, we're also going to attract those personalities as well.
Another member would like to know if you are working with the Escambia County Sheriff's Department.
No, I haven't been invited to do so. I'm working with Pensacola Police Department. I've done work with Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office and with Gulf Breeze. But I haven't been invited by Escambia County Sheriff's Office to do anything.
Okay. Here's another question. Your discussion has focused on personal work that must be done. While that is admirable and important, how do we address officers and leadership who are not in a place of readiness to explore personal biases and personal growth?
Then if they're not, then their community should demand that they do so. Because if your community is not demanding that from your police agency, then you're just as much at fault as your police agency. Because you should demand from your police chiefs and your sheriffs, are they being trained around these issues that are so relevant today? But I will tell you this, when you take a community like Gulf Breeze, a small bedroom community here in Northwest Florida, and you have a mayor and a city manager who has the vision and a chief of police who has the vision to understand the importance of bias in having a self-awareness of it, it says a great deal about their leadership. When you take a county like Santa Rosa and you have a sheriff and you have leadership over there who finds it critically important in this day and time as the world changes, that they have the insight and ability to see the need for this type of training. And in Pensacola Police Department, where you have a chief there and you have a mayor who understand the importance. And it didn't take the community to push them to do it. It is something that they decided to do on their own. And they didn't do it in response to some incident that occurred. They had their vision to take the responsibility as leaders to do and make sure that they receive the training. And even though I gave that training, to me, it doesn't matter where they get the training from. What's important is that they get it from somewhere and from somebody. That's what's hugely important. So in communities where this training is not taking place, where your agencies are not being assertive in doing so, then you as servants and you as citizens, taxpayers, voters in that community should demand and ask that your officers, whoever they are and wherever you may happen to live, you have to take the responsibility and maybe to bring it to their attention or to get them to move from where they are to somewhere else and encourage them and tell them and show them the importance of how this is. It's going to be best served for everybody in this community. And let me be clear about something. This is not a black and white thing. This is a bias thing, a bias thing that finds itself not just within the obvious, but the things that are not so obvious to us. And inasmuch as you may look at your organizational League of Women Voters, there are a lot of similarities that you may have just being women, but there are a lot of differences also within your group. Everybody is not the same. There's different philosophy, thoughts, ideas. There's different ways in which people grew up to see the world and experience the world this day. So we can't think that all people are the same because they all may be of the same gender or the same color or the same religion. There's differences, even among sameness, there's differences. And we have to be aware of that and be cognizant of that. Because we don't know what the lives of people have been, where they walked. We don't know who they're married to. We don't know what color their children are. We don't know what religion they practice. And we don't also know their sexual orientation. So we always have to be aware and cognizant and smart enough to understand that differences are all around us, not just the obvious that we can see, but the things also we cannot see. But as I close here, I also want to add to Jane that even right here in our community here in Pensacola, we have a great community. I've been gone for 40 years, and it's been great for me to come back home and see how this community has evolved in many ways. Do we still have work to do here? Yes. But we as a nation have work to do. But are we moving in the right direction? Not at a turtle's pace, but as a pace in which during our time that we're here, we feel like we're making a difference. So no matter how much time we may have on the face of this earth, however long or short it may be, that's all left up to Almighty God, is that but it's important that we take the responsibility to do the very best that we can in our communities, not allow it to stay stagnant by staying quiet, but for all of us to have the courage to help move that ball down the field. That's going to be to the benefit of everybody in this community. We all love Pensacola, and whether we were born here or not, we know it's a great community, and it's a community that we all want to see, even through the great work that you're doing here. We want to continue to see it evolve as we move forward.
Thank you. There are two questions about Minneapolis, so I'm going to combine them. The first question is, in general, how does policing in Pensacola compare to Minneapolis or other cities now experiencing unrest? And what is the status of police reform in Minneapolis now?
So I think it's very difficult to compare department to department. Minneapolis have historically had a great deal of challenges, particularly around race in Minneapolis. And they got to where they are by no mistake. They got there by their inability to continue to do something different over the years. And you can change chiefs every year. You can have a white chief, a female chief, a chief of color. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's a bigger cultural issue. And what you saw happen out there on the street of May 25th, 2020 of this year was also cultural in nature. May not have been as egregious in other cases, but that wasn't the first sign of problems in that department. They've been troubled for a very long time. So I will not by any stretch compare that department to Pensacola. I think you have a police department here that has the ability to hear the community. I think you have a mayor that has the ability to hear the community. But more important is that you have a community and its membership that has the courage to raise a voice when it hear or see something that they don't feel good about. And then you have elected and appointed officials who have the ability to listen and to attempt to make some changes. So I in no stretch want to Pensacola in the same sentence as Minneapolis, because Minneapolis got some serious problems that they're going to have to deal with. They're going to get there as a city at some point, and I will do what I can from the position that I'm in attempt to help them. But at the end of the day, it's going to be their decision as to how they want to move forward. They're doing a lot of things to try to change things there, but it's going to take time. And what was the second part of your question?
The second part, I think you just answered. They wanted to know how Minneapolis is doing right now with regard to reform. So I think you just answered that part of the question.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing what they can, but it's a challenge, and it's something that's going to take some time to do. And I had an opportunity the other night, Tuesday night, I think it was, or Wednesday night. I'd been in Minneapolis all this week, but I went out to the George Floyd Memorial there. They still have the street blocked off, and it's very surreal. And it's a community at large that is still hurting, still very angry, still very sad. And here again, let me be clear, it's not isolated just to the African-American community. And there are people across that community and across that county who are struggling with what occurred still. And all of us, quite frankly, have been traumatized in some small or large way when we saw the images for 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a man dying in front of us. That is just not something we are exposed to. And when we see those images over and over and over, it has an impact on all of us if we have any type of conscience whatsoever.
There's another question on a different topic. What is your opinion on the use of body cams?
Body cams came out. Myself and 10 other people were the ones who recommended to President Obama back in 2005 on March 2nd, when we delivered that document to him there at in the Oval Office. And one of the first recommendations that were made was that body cameras must be introduced into 21st century policing. And it must be introduced for a number of reasons. One, the public wants more accountability. And people want to know as much information as they can about what occurred. Too many times, police officers have been blamed of things that they just did not do. And private body cameras have supported their statements. And then on the flip side of that, there have been events that have occurred that reveal much more than what was stated by our peace officers, and clearly suggest that there were some things there that were either unethical or illegal. So the use of body cameras and the use of technology, period, is going to continue in advancing policing into the 21st century. And if there's agencies out there today that don't have body cameras, then I can assure them that at some point in time, they're going to find themselves in a predicament where they did have that technology, as opposed to refuting the technology, utilizing that technology to fight crime, to build relationships and trust in your community, and make it very clear that you have nothing to hide. And at the same time, it reduces the likelihood of people making false statements against officers that are not true. It works for everybody, and it helps build trust. It helps build legitimacy. That's what that technology can do for us. There's many agencies across the country that have acquired it and utilize it and benefit from it. And then there's still those, just like when it comes to training, they're still living, still doing something very different. And I just hope that over time that they will get there, and I'll certainly be willing to help them get there if they just reach out to me. I'm gonna have to end here, Jane.
Okay.
It has been an absolute pleasure to have spent time with you and the League of Women Voters. And I would really like to encourage that you all continue to do the great work that you're doing, and that you support your local public safety, but you also challenge your local public safety as an organization to continue to evolve. And that is the benefit to all of us. And I think in many ways we should feel very good about our community here. But we still got work to do. And hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have work to do, but we are able to do that. I think about, we just did a forum for the sheriff's position, and those candidates, we hosted. And it makes me think in a whole new way about what we should be focused on as a voter in that race to know.
Yeah. And questions you need to be asking these new sheriffs that are coming, those that are two gentlemen that are running for sheriff. Mm-hmm. They've thought about body cameras. If they win, are they going to employ them? And what's their idea around training and making sure that they're all constantly trained? Those are important questions. And don't be shy about asking those questions, because you want to know now, not after November 3rd. You want to ask both of them now.
We did press them on both those topics. We grilled them pretty hard.
Good for you. Good for you. All right.
Well, thank you so much again for speaking to us. And I have a jillion notes that I've written down, so I may be in contact with you again. But
good for you. It was great being with you and your membership and all that were on this morning. It's been great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
I just want to make a couple of announcements to the membership as we close. Don't forget about our next membership meeting on Saturday, October 17th. It's a very important meeting because we will be covering what you need to know when you get ready to cast that vote, particularly the 6 amendments that are on the ballot, and open to any other questions that might be coming from our membership. Thank you, and we hope to see you again, and I'll turn it back to Mary Louise to do the technology part.
Thank you. I have one last announcement from Vivian Faircloth. She discovered that on vote411.org, you can now find information on the judges that are on our ballot. So it's well worth checking that out, because it's difficult to find information on the judges. And I'm going to end the meeting for everybody. That will also turn off Facebook Live. And thanks for your patience with me and getting the meeting started. It takes a while to do all this technology, Taz. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Mary Louise. We appreciate your work so much.
No problem. I'm enjoying it.